Hello, everyone, and welcome to SCORE Fairfield County's live webinar on surviving and thriving with franchise ownership. I'm Tim Ryan, the webinar coordinator and a business mentor here at SCORE Fairfield County, and I'll be your host. Our presenters today are Frank Dunn and Michael Rosen. More on them in just a minute. First, some brief information on SCORE. There's over 320 offices and 11,000 volunteers nationwide. We're part of the Small Business Administration. In SCORE Fairfield County, we have over 130 volunteers with a wide range of industry, process, and subject matter expertise. We offer 3 primary value-added services to small business owners: free one-on-one counseling. 2, we offer educational workshops and webinars, over 150 a year. And 3, we offer extensive resources on our website, including a network of subject matter experts at your disposal and templates to build business plans, financial projections, etc. For our next webinars, I would suggest you check out our calendar at our website for other upcoming webinars. New events are being added daily. Some useful information about today's event. We have set aside time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please use the chat window at any time during the presentation. It is located in the lower part of your screen. Our webinar will end sharply at 1 p.m. to respect your time. The session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org within the next couple of days. Now, our speakers. Frank Dunn has served as an expert franchise coach and FranNet market president, effectively matching individual needs with the right franchise in their local area. In 2019, he joined a partnership group which now owns several Supercut franchise salons in New York and New Jersey. Prior to joining FranNet, Frank spent 24 years in the professional services, marketing, and advertising industry. As a franchise consultant and FranNet market president, Michael Rosen provides education and guidance to help you determine if franchise ownership is right for you by matching your skills, goals, lifestyle, and budget. Prior to joining FranNet in 2017, Michael spent 38 years in the insurance industry, most recently as CIO for Renaissance Insurance. Now I'll turn it over to Michael. Michael, it's all yours.
It's a pleasure to be here once again. We always look forward to presenting our information about FranNet to the SCORE and SCORE webinar participants. A little bit about FranNet. FranNet is a 32-year-old international franchise consulting group. We have over 100 locally based consultants across North America, the US, Canada, and now also in Europe. What we do is match individuals who want to own a business with franchises that meet their needs, their skill sets, their interests, their financial abilities, and their goals. Okay? We use best-in-class tools and resources and a proven methodology to assist our clients. And very importantly, we are national partners with both SCORE and the Small Business Development Centers. Both SCORE and the SBDC are resource partners of the Small Business Administration. All of our services are provided to our clients at no additional cost to them. We are compensated by franchisors to whom we make referrals, and they provide us with the means to provide our free educational services to our clients and to groups like SCORE. So now I'll turn it over to Frank Dunn, who will take you through a presentation about business ownership and franchising.
Thanks very much, Michael. I appreciate that. Nice job in articulating what FranNet does. And real quickly, just to sort of give you a feel for what we're going to be talking about today. And if you're listening to a recorded version of this, we are actually providing this webinar during the COVID-19 era. And of course, there's a little bit of a new normal. Maybe the way that we think about franchising and business ownership is a little bit different than a few months ago. So we might be talking about some of those aspects, and we'll try and paint a picture for you of the small business landscape currently as best as we're able. We'll discuss a couple of different business models, some of which might be a good fit with franchising overall. We'll then do a deep dive into franchise ownership and what that all means. We'll talk about costs and funding opportunities, of course, a very important part in any business. And then, of course, it ends with a discussion about finding the right fit. So real quickly, we might begin with a discussion about how things are structured currently. And this is a slide that we used to present fairly regularly. But, in the last century, companies had about 85% of their employees working on a full-time basis. And so there was a sprinkling of, temporary or other employees. And, in times of old, you used to be able to work for 30 years for a company. You get the gold watch and a set of golf clubs, at retirement, and you can ride off into the retirement sunset. Well, at the turn of this century, that model changed. And so the fundamental ways that corporate America and traditional employment have operated have changed rather radically, especially with the rising, cost of healthcare and whatnot. Companies were loath to keep full-time employees, especially if they can avoid it. And so they relied a lot less on having full-time employees, and they relied more upon outside consultants or temporary employees, or they would outsource to India and China, or former employee banks, alliances, and that kind of thing. So it was really as a way of mitigating certain cost structures, and that's had a dramatic effect on the labor market. So as there perhaps are, less traditional opportunities than there used to be, many people are looking at business ownership out of necessity, and particularly right now, with many furloughs and layoffs, we're seeing probably a good many people at least willing to explore the idea of owning a business. And real quickly, this is all against the backdrop of what is this new normal. And we're currently seeing right now businesses being shut down. If you look at the state of California, they have gone into a second round of shutdowns, unfortunately, and many businesses have lost revenue. They've, furloughed some of their employees or laid them off altogether. They've experimented with reduced compensation, reduced scheduling. Many businesses, as a matter of survival, have sought, governmental loans. So that's put pressures on the banks. Of course, there's, certain issues with liquidity out there. There are, trends that we're seeing right now with remote working. Certainly, everybody right now is participating via webinar, and there's a lot more of that stuff going on with Zoom calls and that kind of thing. And many employees now are being forced to work from home as opposed to being given the option, which is perhaps their preferred, preference. And that may have implications as far as the way that we all work together, on a long-term basis. There are job role disruptions, everything from job sharing to days of the week to the amount of hours and the types of hours that we're now working. Customer and staff safety concerns and precautions. And Michael, I know you may want to ask me later some specific questions about my experience with supercuts, just to keep me honest, but certainly, in the era of COVID, we've all had to rethink, these safety precautions, not only from the customer standpoint, but the staff standpoint as well. And then, of course, for anybody who's interested in exploring business ownership, there's a question of where should we focus? And FranNet has been running a series of webinars specifically focused on the topic of recession-resistant businesses, or at least those that are essential service businesses. And I'm happy to report that franchising has certainly seen its fair share of success amongst concepts that are pretty well positioned for the future, even in the era of COVID. So first of all, obviously today's discussion is focused on the idea of owning a business. And you might otherwise think, geez, you know, are Frank and Michael crazy? You know, this is really not the best time to start a business, is it? And the God's honest truth is, and you see the headline from the New York Times there, that a pandemic actually might be the right time to start a business. And we get it, of course. There's a lot of caution and anxiety out there in the market, and nobody has that crystal clear crystal ball to predict where things are going to end up. But we do see certain trends that make it such that people may want to leverage what's going on in the market. It's everything from an increased pool of talent to perhaps weakened competition, to low interest rates amongst banks and so forth. And from the real estate perspective, there's an increased number of vacancies and lower rates that can be negotiated. There are certain marketing opportunities, perhaps with sponsorships that have been opened up, or even media companies that are willing to cut deals and offer preferential rates. So I guess the central point of all of this, of course, is to be ready. And one of the ways with which to do that is to engage in research, which we're going to be talking about today. And even, well, let me back up here. We certainly recognize the fact that you perhaps may not be interested in launching a business today or even tomorrow. The central idea, though, is to arm you with enough information so that you can make an informed decision down the road. So it's important to distinguish between this phase of researching a business or franchise versus acquiring one. And even if you were to start today, the likelihood is that you may not be in the position of pulling the trigger until the fall. And then even then, you might be looking at, you know, officially starting the business at the start of the new year. So just because you're searching for an opportunity and engaging in research now does not necessarily mean that you are committing to a purchase. There's very much of a process involved, and we'll be talking about that a little bit further on. And even in a pre-COVID era, we would be advocating the idea that, no, you're not crazy for thinking about engaging in business ownership. In fact, we see this statistic from the SBA that some 99.7% of all businesses are small business, and they account for 2/3 of all of the jobs that are added to the economy, and 5.5% of business owners were unemployed just last year. Now, we expect these numbers to change, of course, given COVID, but for a long period of time, we have seen that owning a business has been the way that 5 of 6 millionaires have made their money. It's not from working their way up the corporate food chain or some other way. It is from owning their own business. And there's nothing magical about being a business owner. You need not be a millionaire, of course, to begin thinking about it. And first off, I guess from an education perspective, we see a broad spectrum of educational strata. It's everybody from a high school graduate to those with associate's degrees to bachelor's to master's, and even a smattering of folks who have doctorates. Arguably, they all have to have the entrepreneurial itch. And we see on the right-hand side a breakout of the different age ranges here, with some 35% representing the age 50 to 59 strata. And, you know, if there is an association to be made, it is that the connection between age and owning a business might be a function of having more time to accumulate more wealth. Certainly a 22-year-old or 23-year-old who has not been in the workforce for a very long period of time has not had enough time to accumulate wealth. So it stands to reason that the older someone is, the greater amount of time they've had to accumulate the wealth that they can then invest in the business. So just something to think about. And another thing to think about, of course, is the idea of comparing owning a business to traditional employment. On the left-hand side, we see this graphic where the more time that you spend inside a company and the more that you work your way up the food chain inside a company, the greater the risks are. And it stands to reason that as you assume a role, within middle management or even, in the senior ranks, you're going to be making more money. Well, what is the easiest way for a company to reduce costs? It is to eliminate the need for some of that high-priced talent. And not to mention the fact that there are many factors beyond your control. So if a new sales boss comes in and wants to bring in his or her own team, if your company engages in or gets involved in a mergers and acquisitions transaction, if your company decides to outsource your department to either India or China, or many of you may be experiencing what's going on right now with furloughs and layoffs and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff beyond one's control inside their company, even though they may very well be a star performer. Now, the owners and the board of directors, of course, are not laying themselves off. So that's why the appeal of owning a business, stands out amongst a good many people. And I'd love to tell you that there are no risks in entrepreneurship. There sure are, but they are inverted to what we see in traditional employment. And when you think about it, it actually makes pretty good sense, because the greater the risks are in the early stage of owning your own business. And it's until such time that you get your feet wet a little bit, you know your market a little bit, your brand presence gets known, all of a sudden you're starting to get clients, you win their trust so that you can retain their services, you earn their trust to the point where they can then refer you, your marketing starts to take effect. So the central ingredient to making all of that work really is time. And the more time that is given to achieving those things, the greater the chances for success in the business. Now, our good friends at SCORE, I'm sure, can back this up too with some of the conversations that they've had with folks. But what ends up happening is that many businesses pull the plug before the business ever had the chance to be commercially viable. And when you think about that for a second, that can make a great deal of sense, because we know that in addition to running the business, individuals also have to, put food on the table. They've got to put clothes on their kids' backs. They've got to be able to pay the mortgage and so forth and so on. So life needs to be lived on top of running the business. And it's an important consideration, because we would want to make sure that somebody has sufficient runway to sustain themselves while the business is ramping up. And I think it's prudent thinking here to suggest that nobody should ever bet the farm on any kind of business. You at least want to have some safety net underneath you. And it's going to take some time, of course, as intimated, to achieve that level of comfort, and even before you hit break even. If, for example, it's a brick and mortar business, you very well could spend the first 6 or 9, maybe even 12 months just looking for a location. So that's at least until such time that the cash registers start ringing. Now, let's quickly talk about some of the different business ownership options. Of course, franchising is just but one piece of the puzzle. You can certainly start a business from scratch. Maybe you've had that idea that you were thinking about in the shower. Maybe you want to turn your hobby into a profession. And there's a lot of upside with that. Financially is one starting point. You don't have to run decisions by anybody else. You can pivot, you can be nimble. If 60 Minutes, comes to do a profile on you, it's you that ends up getting interviewed. But there are some potential downsides that make this disadvantageous, and beginning with the financial aspects. But businesses, or banks I should say, are loath to fund businesses without a proven track record. And particularly in this market, getting funding may be very difficult. You're going to have to create systems from scratch. You're going to have to engage in a lot of experimentation. And until such time that you perfect that model and figure everything out, that could extend your timeline to profitability. Again, we earlier talked about the fact that many businesses pull the plug. Well, these are some of the things that make, startups cringe and wonder, gee, maybe I should consider owning an existing business, right? Where maybe there's already customers in place. Maybe there are already employees. Maybe there's a location. Maybe the brand name is already very well established in a particular market. So those are all certainly positives to think about. But what happens when, the seller of that business decides to sell? Now let's take a lesson from the real estate market, where if you were selling your house, you want to shout that from the rooftops because it increases the chances of somebody knowing somebody who could potentially be a buyer. Can you do that with a business? What happens to the employees if they find that that the business is being shopped? They're going to start sending their resumes around. What about your customers? Aren't they going to start shopping for alternative service providers? What about your vendors? All of a sudden, you may find that your credit terms shrink from 60 days to cash on delivery. And oh, by the way, the seller is going to tell you everything that that he thinks you want to hear. We call that happy ears, including the fact that, yes, Mr. Buyer, don't worry about it. I'm going to be there by your side holding your hand as you transition into the business. Well, how do you enforce that when they're on the beach in Florida? So not to suggest that owning an existing business can't work for you, but your checklist of things to consider perhaps is a little bit longer. And this all culminates, I guess, with a discussion here about franchising, because it does combine the best of both worlds. And definitionally, real quickly, let's just define what franchising is. I will first mention that what we're looking at here is a PowerPoint presentation. Anybody who's ever installed PowerPoint or any other piece of Microsoft software on their computer is familiar with the notion of franchising, because when you first install that software, there's a little button on the bottom right-hand side that says, click here, I accept terms and conditions. And franchising is not too terribly different. You're basically agreeing to a set of parameters and principles and rules by which you're going to operate the business. And that license basically entitles you to the names and the trademarks, the products, and all of the business systems that are associated with that franchise. And if done properly, they've already done the experimentation. They've already surveyed the market. So on day one, you should know, who your customers are. How are you going to reach them? What are the best vehicles for doing so? How much will that cost you? How much money should you set aside for marketing? What about your staff? How many people are you going to need? What skill sets? Where do you recruit them? How much should you pay them? So all this information is set up for you on day one to help you succeed at a faster rate. And so we talk about franchising enabling you to be starting on third base, if you'll forgive the baseball terminology. And for that license, the franchise is going to basically grant you that license in exchange for an initial franchise fee. You can think of that as the price of entry or country club membership fee if it's easier. Most franchises will actually lose money on that initial franchise fee. That's the cost of onboarding, right? With the training and support and initial setup that is required when you're first starting. They make their money primarily from ongoing royalties. So it's a percentage of your ongoing revenues. Typically, throughout the history of franchising, that rate has been about 6%. Although we've seen some experimentation, some are charging lower amounts, some are charging more. Some are actually charging monthly flat fees. And certainly in the era of COVID, some are being even a little bit sympathetic and delaying the cost of some of those royalties. But beneath it all, the one thing that franchises have, especially as compared to independent businesses, are its systems. It's those systems that enable them to walk into a fragmented market and dominate. And so if you take the first letter of each of the words at the bottom, right? So save yourself stress, time, energy, and money, that spells system. So hopefully those things are appealing to you as a prospective business owner. So here we have just spent some time talking about what franchising is. Now let's spend a moment in talking about what franchising is not. And it is not just fast food and retail. And certainly, you may have thought about this before today's presentation, that, franchising was just, fast food and retail, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Subway, that kind of thing. So I'm happy to report franchising is much more expansive. There are some 3,500 concepts in 150 different industries. And if you can think of a business, dollars to donuts, someone's tried to franchise it. Success due to product quality. Well, if this were an in-person workshop, I'd be asking you to raise your hands about how many of you think you can make a better hamburger than McDonald's. It isn't because they make the world's greatest hamburger that accounts for their success. There's plenty of businesses out there that have substandard products, or product is only but one part of the formula for success. Can't succeed with competition. I think our friends at SCORE would certainly back this up, that there are very few industries that don't have competition, and if it doesn't exist today, there's a reasonably good chance, you may have it next week, 6 months from now, a year from now. The important thing, I think, is to develop the systems necessary to compete. And sometimes competition is simply a reflection of demand for the product. You may find two different competitors competing for the same customer on opposite sides of the street, for example. Franchises are expensive. Well, that's true, but only in some cases. We see that some 30% of all franchises are, require less than $100,000 total investment. We'll talk a little bit about the profile of some of those, but you need not think, that, you're gonna have to spend $1 million to get into a franchise. There are opportunities across all different stratas of budgets. And on the subject of budgets, you need not think that to make, a decent income, you're gonna have to spend, a pretty penny. There actually has proven to be no correlation between the money that you invest in the business and the type of profits that you can generate. Oftentimes it has really more to do with the role of the owner and what they bring to the table. But the last thing, the bullet here on this slide talks about the fact that no industry experience is required. Now, suffice it to say, most of these opportunities are going to be, plain vanilla, cardboard cutout, easily replicable businesses. Nobody's talking about building military-grade weapons to shoot into outer space or something of that nature. But these are fairly simple businesses that can be taught from person to person. And it's far more important for you to have developed the skills over the course of your career that are going to be necessary to operate the business than for you to have done the business sometime previous in your career. So just because you spent 30 years in banking, for example, you should not feel resigned to pursuing financial or banking opportunities. So I just want to go back to a moment here and compare, the folks who are contemplating businesses versus, a traditional job. This is a study that was done just last year, and it compares those who are intending to buy a franchise versus those who are intending to buy an independent business versus those who are doing neither. And we see that 39% of those are happy in their careers. They're not pursuing anything. 43%, are interested in exploring businesses, and then 53% are exploring franchises. And there, I think the appeal is that they're leveraging a proven formula. It mitigates the risk. They don't have to create systems from scratch. So again, the appeal is that idea of starting on third base, whereas they don't have to engage in a lot of experimentation. So if we look at the metrics of where people are putting their money, we see 57% are, putting their money in new startups or franchises. 39% are putting their money in existing businesses or franchises, and 4% are putting it in business recapitalization plans. So if you were a heating and air conditioning, repair company, and you wanted to expand into Europe, that's the kind of investment that you might be willing to make. So as we think about, the idea of being a business owner, I would argue that this is one of the more important slides from today's presentation. And to make any business sing, you're primarily going to need to think about 5 key areas, beginning with customer acquisition. Michael and I think, are hard-pressed to think of any business, folks at Score 2, that doesn't require customers. You're going to need to satisfy them somehow. So you first need to acquire them. Then the idea would be to retain them. And then, of course, work on referrals. That's how you're going to build your business and grow it. Well, those 3 first areas arguably fall under the category of sales. So in your heart of hearts, if you know that you're not the kind of individual that has strengths in this area of sales, you're going to need to think hard about that, whether that means you're hiring or outsourcing or coming up with some other kind of a solution to focus on those areas. The other 2 areas to think about, of course, are marketing, or for the purposes of this discussion, we'll define marketing as that set of activities necessary to predispose a customer towards wanting to work with you. And all of this, of course, leads to the promise of some kind of a fulfillment. Your customer is going to expect something in return for the money that they are giving you. So we will call that operations. Interestingly, we see a lot of husbands and wives going into business together, or parents and children, where one is focused on sales and marketing and the other is focused on operations. But clearly you can see the synergistic relationship or need for it between those 2 areas. And the dividing line that you see is intended to connote the idea that a franchise is set up to help you within each of those areas, which is of comfort to some people because otherwise, as an independent business owner, all of the heavy lifting is going to fall on your shoulders and your shoulders alone. So many people are enamored with the idea of a franchise because they know that they're getting support for customer acquisition and customer retention and customer referrals, marketing, and fulfillment. So let me just take a quick temperature check. Are we okay here? Any questions at this point?
Yeah, but we'll save the questions for the end.
Okay, all right. So let's talk here about who is it that buys franchises. And earlier I mentioned that one need not be a millionaire to do this. We see plenty of people from various stratas, and 16% fall into the C-level level of individual CEOs, CMOs, and so forth. There are 14% of vice presidents, 21% are directors, 22% are managers. The biggest group are other, and it's everybody from teachers to engineers, postal workers, salesmen, CPAs, attorneys, you name it. So you get a sense here from looking at this slide that there's a broad cross-section of individuals, and they all have different incomes and different skill sets, and we'll come to talk about that more in just a few minutes. The other thing to consider here is that it's not just about the money. There is a quality of life component, and whether you're a married woman with dependents or women with no dependents, married men with dependents, and men with no dependents, they all pretty much come to the same metrics, except to say, and I think Michael would agree, that being the breadwinner of the family brings about certain considerations. So we can report that there are plenty of people that we see going into franchise ownership on a semi-absentee basis, perhaps as a hedging strategy, perhaps as a way of getting your spouse working, that kind of thing. So you need not necessarily look at franchise ownership as a either or opportunity. One of the other really important appealing things about franchising is the fact that it is a regulated industry. And yes, we may be all a little bit squeamish about having government intervene in our lives, but here it may well be a good thing because each franchisor is required to put out a legal prospectus every year, and it's called the financial disclosure document, which might be otherwise referred to as the everything you ever wanted to know about a franchise but were afraid to ask document. There are 24 main sections, if my memory serves correct, and it covers everything from the history of the franchise to what's the background of the executives to have they ever been in bankruptcy or declared, involved in litigation, that kind of thing. This document spells out the costs, so who's on the hook to do what the parameters are, what the obligations are, certain financing, aspects. The biggest news and noteworthy item on this list, though, is number 10, which talks about the list of franchisees. And that's particularly important here because the research process is designed to, again, help you get the information that you need to make an informed decision. Well, franchising is unique in that part of the research process will expose you to these franchisees. So if you want real world perspective and insight into what it's like to own one of these franchises, there's no better way than to pick up the phone and call them. And not only would we expect that you want to talk to the top performers, but also the everyday Joes, the underperformers, and believe it or not, yes, even the failed franchisees, because it's important for you to figure out which group you gravitate towards. And if we've done this properly, then the likelihood and hope is that you have more in common with the top performers. So that's the idea behind, leveraging the franchisee information in that document. Real quickly, just to give you a sense of the investment landscape, there's sort of a mama bear, baby bear, papa bear orientation to this, where home-based businesses are certainly the least expensive. We see about 27% of franchises in that area. And, again, 30% of franchises fall into this area, and you can operate it, as simply as, having a laptop and a phone and being able to work from your basement. The appeal of this, of course, is that there's, very, limited or no inventory. You may have limited or no employees, and certainly there's no brick and mortar component to it. But the way that you're going to make money primarily is, from selling something. And many franchises have a good formula for doing that. But much as appealing as the idea of working from home might be, if you're not in your heart of hearts a good salesperson and that doesn't float your boat, then that may not be the right opportunity. A hybrid opportunity is the bump up from that. And here you're probably going to spend somewhere between 100 and 200,000. You may have a 1,500 square foot, office, and it's a place for your employees to change in their uniforms, punch in with their time cards, grab their supplies, and then go off into the market to service the clients that you have lined up for them. So examples of that might be, a painting franchise or a cleaning franchise, something of that nature. The king of all franchises, at least in terms of expense, are those that involve retail and brick and mortar. Earlier I mentioned, the fast food, places. Those are emblematic of this kind of opportunity. They tend to be much more expensive. There's obviously, inventory and employees and lease costs and taxes and that kind of stuff. And of course, because of the fact that it does involve real estate, there are variable costs, right? Because real estate is driven by footprint and location. So there are certain ways to control that, but it becomes clear, upon doing an analysis that brick and mortar is definitely going to be more costly than doing something on a service-based basis. That all said, like I mentioned before, this could be a good time to explore those opportunities because landlords now seem to be a little bit more lenient. They're more open to negotiating rates. And you may very well find that there to be more vacancies than there were even a short number of months ago. So as we come down the home stretch here, let me just sort of paint a picture for you of the spectrum of opportunities. And there is the category called inbound retail. This is primarily where the customer is coming to find you. Fast food, hair salons, dry cleaners would be examples. Outbound retail, think about a sign company that has a 2,000 square foot facility in an industrial park somewhere. It's not a sexy environment, but it's a place where customers may go, and it's where the sausage might get made, so to speak. But that's the kind of opportunity, you know, that you're looking at there. There are bridge opportunities, which are sort of the hybrids that I had talked about before, the painting and cleaning businesses where it's in a small office. Again, nothing sexy, but just sort of a central hub for your employees. The last area talks about outbound sales and service. That is exactly just like it sounds. So it's everything from, you know, selling commercial cleaning to, digital marketing opportunities or business coaching or expense reduction. You can work from home, but those are clearly much more hands-on kind of opportunities. The area I skipped over is called area development, and we can spend, you know, additional time after this if you really have any questions about it. But the general idea here is that one acts as a de facto local franchisor in a given market. And that individual is then responsible on behalf of the franchisor to recruit franchisees and help support them managerially. So it's everything from figuring out marketing strategies to recruiting to everything that will help the individual franchisee in that market be successful. So you can kind of think of it as an additional buffer layer between the franchisee and the franchisor in the headquarters. So last couple of slides here, one very important question you might be thinking about is, gee, this all sounds great. I would love to start a franchise. How do I finance it? And maybe you have a rich uncle, maybe you have, you know, some money tucked away under your pillow, and that's fantastic. But for most people, there's a three-legged stool, and it really revolves around the idea of having some liquidity, you know, stocks, bonds, some other form of investment, or there could be an SBA loan or even a conventional loan, which is actually the path that my partners and I pursued for our Supercut salons. So there are various, you know, banking solutions that are out there, and the area that you see highlighted in the upper left-hand corner talks about the use of retirement funds. And you've probably been conditioned to believe that, well, you shouldn't touch that because it would expose you to paying taxes and penalties. And we're happy to report that there's a mechanism in place. It's not new. It's existed for a good long while, probably some 30 years, that enables you to use your qualified you know, retirement savings, whether it's a 401k or IRA, in a way that does not expose you to paying taxes and penalties. And it's a pretty complicated you know, protocol, and we have, you know, certain partners that we rely upon to help guide our clients. But just know in the back of your mind that it is an opportunity and could be one of those three legs of the three-legged stool. The central premise of course, is that if you had, I'm going to pick a number, $100,000, and it was invested in AT&T and Coca-Cola and IBM, that would now go away. And instead you're investing in John Doe Industries. And so you, as the CEO of John Doe Industries, John gets to spend that money however he sees fit on the business, as long as it's for legitimate business expenses, whether it's equipment, marketing, staffing, office expenses, that kind of thing. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a snapshot there of what some of the more popular financing methods has been. And again, because of the whole COVID situation, I'm willing to bet that the dynamics of that look a little bit different. particularly with the lending markets, but certainly we can point you in the right direction, and so too, I'm sure, can our friends at SCORE. So let me just talk about this one last slide, and then maybe I'll pass things back to our good friend Michael Rosen. But the idea here is that we want to now start thinking about what is the right fit for a franchise. And I will share with you personally that I have a high school teenager who's going into his senior year in high school, and so we're looking at colleges. And I think the comparisons are actually pretty good. So for example, if you had a child who was interested in studying marine biology or astrophysics, something of that nature, Harvard University may not be the right fitting opportunity. As great a college as it is, as wonderful a reputation as it is, we actually want our clients and candidates to think selfishly. What is it about the business that you want for yourself? What is your personal criteria? And as we begin to think about your individual model, you might think about the idea of pursuing that which you love, that which the world needs. Obviously, every product has demand. I would hate to be in the blockbuster video business right about now. The idea of pursuing that which you can be paid for. And it's worth mentioning that, yes, there are certain altruistic opportunities. The last area might be that which you are good at. I talked earlier about, if you know you're not good at sales, don't pursue a sales opportunity where that's an integral part of being successful. So if you look at those four concentric circles, we see a star in the middle of them, and that's ideally where you want to be. You want to find something that hits in the dead center of those four. But we know from years worth of doing this and the way that human beings tend to think and operate, that to find something dead center is a difficult thing. So as in life, there may be certain trade-offs that you'll be expected to make. And that is part of the research process. But it all hinges upon the idea of knowing your why. And I'm not sure how many of you on today's call know Simon Sinek, but very popular speaker out there. You can look at his YouTube videos. He talks about this notion, and the very first question you need to ask yourself is, all the dynamics surrounding your particular situation. Why would you be interested in a cleaning business? Why would you want a opportunity that exposes you to work, nights and weekends and that kind of thing? So that's really the beginning of, model building, and maybe to take things from here to talk further about model building. Michael, do you want to just take us home here?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Frank. Let's try to get through this next couple of slides as quickly as we can. We want to make sure we leave time for Q&A. So what this slide is showing is that it's really important to bring it all together. Understand what are your transferable business skills, how they can be applied to being a business owner. What are you good at? But besides that, you also want to look at what are the important business criteria to you. Do you want that home-based business? Do you want a business that can scale to multiple units? Understand who's your preferred customer. Is it a B2B, a business professional image important to you? Maybe do you want to work only Monday to Friday? You don't want your business to be open on the weekends. What is your, what's your financial budget for this particular project? What are you comfortable with? So these are the things that you need to consider. And as you do that, how do you start? You can certainly, do the exploration on your own. We can provide you with a guide. In fact, if you reach out to us with your email address after this, we'll provide you with a SCORE FranNet co-branded brochure called Roadmap to Success. and that'll help you guide you with the different aspects of performing a due diligence. Or you can elect to work with Frank or I. We'll be happy to help you through the process of building your business model, starting with a personal franchise assessment, which will really provide us with the foundation upon which we'll build a business model. It'll be very helpful to you. It'll put it into language that I'm sure you'll agree with the findings, and then we will get to work on matching that business model to franchises and connect the dots. And we'll have a meeting with you and then make referrals and serve as a guide, if you will, a coach through the process of researching the various franchises that we've recommended together during our time. Next slide. In addition, you're going to want to use professional advisors. You'll want to use a franchise attorney before you finalize your decision. This is a big step, and there is a legal franchise agreement. So you're going to want a franchise attorney, somebody who is experienced in franchise law, to look it over. You'll want to speak with a funding consultant and understand your options to be able to finance your business. Okay. You may want an accountant to take a look at your pro forma, the business model that you're building, and help you get your business off the ground. A small business accountant or CPA can do that. You may also want to reach out to a SCORE mentor. They can also help you immeasurably with the various aspects of your due diligence. There are 3 books here that we also recommend. More Than Just French Fries, a collection of articles written by some franchising experts, including some of our colleagues at FranNet. The E-Myth Revisited book is not specifically about franchising, but it's a nice read about somebody who takes a passion and tries to create a business from that. And Street Smart Franchising, as the name suggests, talks about the becoming a franchise owner and some of the things that you might experience along the way. All right. So I would suggest you take a picture of this. It has our contact information on it. There's also a link you can note if you want to complete that readiness assessment. You can go right to that. But reach out to us. We'll provide you with a copy of the slides. As you know, this is also being recorded, so you can view it again from the SCORE website. And we will also send you that brochure, Roadmap to Success. So I think we're at a point now where we can open it up to questions before the thank you. So
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Okay. All right.
Michael and Frank. We'll now use the remaining time for Q&A. We'll take as many as we can until 1 o'clock. So please submit your questions via the chat feature in the lower portion of your screen. So the first question up was, are there resources for studying the viability of a particular franchise? So you could see what the success rate is, I guess, of a particular franchise.
Okay, I'll take a stab at this. You'll find some information available on our website, but the bulk of the information that you're going to want to get in terms of understanding the viability, the success, or failure rate of a particular franchise is going to come from you know, engagement with the franchise, getting a copy of their franchise disclosure document. All that that information is going to be in that document, and as you go through the research process, not only will you have an opportunity to speak with the franchisor, but you'll also have the ability to reach out and speak to franchisees, owners in that that franchise system, and that'll help you understand the viability of a particular franchise, both in your market and given your own background and skills.
Thanks. Next question. How do you see the gig economy affecting franchising? I don't know if he's really asking, but do you think, are there franchises out there that are, I guess, part-time aimed at the gig economy people?
Well, I would say that there are franchises that are maybe more aligned with the gig economy is probably going to be maybe franchises that are home based, you know, or franchises that can provide services to other businesses, and there are franchises like that.
Okay. And is there any average costs that a franchisor can expect to spend regarding like online advertising?
Well, that's really going to vary depending upon the nature of the franchise. We have some franchises that do nearly 100% of their marketing budget aimed at online advertising. That's really becoming more and more important. But it's going to also depend on, you know, whether it's a what kind of a franchise it is. If it's a brick and mortar franchise, then more than that, there may be other ways of reaching your customer base. So really, is going to vary depending on the franchise. But that again is going to be spelled out in detail in the franchise disclosure document and in the conversations that you have with the franchisors. And we certainly, if there's a desire to look for franchises that you know put more emphasis on digital marketing, we certainly can do that. In fact, there's a franchise that does digital marketing. That's what they do, and it's a home-based franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a next question is kind of related to that. In a way, the person is more focused on the specific technical career he's in. He's aware of things like social media and Facebook ads and search engine optimization, websites, stuff like that, but he doesn't really want to spend a lot of time there. Do franchisors provide a lot of support in that type of area as well as marketing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll respond to that one, Michael, if
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
I just would argue that not all franchises are the same, you know, in the way that not all marriages are the same. And this is also why it's important for someone to understand their preferences. Some franchises may be very rigid. Some could be, you know, the complete opposite of that. So it's really important to understand, you know, from the beginning, what kind of expectations that you have. So suffice it to say, some franchisors do a much better job of supporting their franchisees, you know, with things like marketing. Sometimes they have strategic alliances that can be leveraged, or maybe they made certain investments that can be leveraged. It stands to reason, though, the franchisors almost always will say they cannot do for you, the individual local franchisee, what you can do for yourself. So there is this joint effort. Franchisees are almost always expected to do something locally with the you know, air coverage you know, provided by the franchisor.
Okay, yeah, good.
Typically, go ahead.
Yep. Well, we did have one person who wanted to know how much does it cost to talk to you to have this model developed, et cetera? Is there a cost to them or?
Zero. It costs you nothing. Okay, as I said, we get paid at the back end if you were to go to the end of the process and make a make an investment in yourself and in a franchise, we'll get a referral fee. But there's no obligation, contractual, implied, or otherwise. You're free to take the franchise assessment. You're free to meet with us and and go through the business modeling. And we hope that we're able to present you with businesses that make sense and that you want to go forward with. But we also understand too that we're dealing with some unprecedented times today, and this may or may not be the right time. But yeah, there's no cost.
Thanks, Michael. Those are all the questions we have time for today. As a reminder, the recording of the webinar and the materials are available within a couple of days on our fairfieldcounty.score.org website. Please check out our website for upcoming webinars. Again, SCORE offers free individual counseling, so please use the link on the screen or visit our website and click Request a Mentor. Also, please fill out your evaluations that have been sent to you at the end of the webinar. On behalf of SCORE, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's live webinar. In closing, a big thank you to FranNet for presenting today. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.